All right. So thank you very much, all, for joining me on another episode of You're in Charge. Now what? And today I'm very excited. We have Fred Petito, and he is the owner of Attain Leadership. He is an executive coach, and he helps large and small businesses. But why it was fascinating for me to have Fred on was his focus is the marketing managers in these corporations. Usually executive coaches are brought in for C-level, and that's fine, but somehow the CMO gets left out of this coaching. So first off, welcome, Fred. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Glenn. Welcome. Glad to be here. Thank you.
So let's dive in right there. Why did you see the need to focus your skill set of helping, people have better processes, how to communicate, how to build culture? Why was the marketing person such an either interesting focus point, or why was that the most important point for you to jump into a company?
Yeah, I mean, good question. I think the first reason is I have over 20 years of marketing experience, right? As a C-level type roles, as chief strategy officer, chief experience officer. I've worked mostly on the consulting and agency side, but I've worked with big, companies in healthcare, pharma, life science, tech, automotive. So I've seen a lot. I have a doctorate in marketing, so that's my my area of expertise.
Right.
But secondly, I think even more importantly is I believe that there's two things going on. Number one, I do think, especially on the agency side, a lot of executives are elevated into leadership roles without development.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's, I think agencies back in the day, maybe, in the 80s, before the 80s or 90s, whatever, in the heyday, the big agencies had executive development programs. They trained their people, they cultivated talent. Now it's different. They don't do that as much as they used to. It's a lot more, I guess, a transactional mindset, and so there's not a lot of development going on. So I think that's a big part of it. But also, I feel like the practice of marketing, being a marketing practitioner, has changed dramatically, I believe, in the last 10 years, and then even more so in the last 4 or 5 years.
Right.
The days of the marketers being the big idea folks, with the splashy campaigns and the creative ideas and just being the big idea people, that's gone. Those days are over. So the role of marketing leader is so much more multifaceted, is so much more diverse, so much more challenging. The scope of the marketing leader role is spans everything from obviously the creative piece, but now they have responsibility for customer experience, data management,
Right.
they're maybe even at the table as driving the growth agenda for the organization. So the role, I think, has marketing, I think, has kind of been elevated in organizations, and I think there's an opportunity for marketers to step up into that more enterprise kind of strategy role, if you will.
Right. Yeah, and that makes sense. And what I loved about that, and there's so much to unpack in there, because I agree with you. There is this image of the Mad Men TV series or
Yeah,
large
absolutely.
corporations where, you went there and you knew it was going to take you time to move up, or you got educated and moved up, where it does seem a little bit more either transactional, or I can hire people on project base. So instead of really grooming a marketing department, with the Fivers of the world and everything else, I can just basically put in my orders for either banners or content or something else, versus growing this idea of a team. So I think you're right. I think it's evolving, but the big point I want to dive into, and I think you're spot on, is this. I think the marketer, at least for a lot of organizations, because I have an agency too, and when we're working with people on our contact on the other side, a lot of times they've become sort of a catch-all, where they are the marketers, but they're also data, half IT, or maybe they're involved in sales as well. So it seems like there isn't just this idea of the only thing I do is market. And so what when you interact with the company, how, if that's what you run into, how do you convince the leadership to uncouple that and give that marketer more time, let's say, to do what they do best?
Yeah, I think that I kind of maybe look at it a slightly different way. I
Sure.
feel that the role of marketing
Hmm.
has just expanded, and um, of course, you still have technology folks, you still have a sales organization, but the complexity that kind of combines, all the different functions in the organization. Um, I think a lot of that complexity has fallen on the marketer, and so. Um, when you look at I have this infographic on my website, right? I talk about this, there's these 12 kind of, components of the marketing leader, right? From brand
Right.
steward, then you got to be a visionary, then you need to be a brand storyteller, you need to be a media innovator, you also need to be a cross-functional team leader, right? Because you're heavily reliant on technology, on the technology and the digital team to implement stuff or to co-create things with you. But then you're kind of accountable, or at least have a very tight kind of a line of responsibility to the sales organization if you're if
Yes.
in a B2B environment. So you need to kind of manage those relationships, right? And then another thing is that I don't think a lot of marketers, look, the budgets sometimes for marketing are astronomical, right? We're
Hmm.
talking about, I've worked on clients where the working media budget was $300 million, right? So in the US alone, so that's a pretty big budget, right?
Yeah.
That's a big ticket item. And many times, I think, the payback on that is hard to measure. I think, attribution is difficult.
Hmm.
And also, I don't think a lot of marketers think like maybe an investor or a CFO, or they don't think about you know the downstream benefits maybe as hard as a CFO or a CEO or a president to think about it. Um, so I think there's just so many things that marketer to be an effective leader has to be kind of cognizant of and aware of. And so what I try to do, as an executive and leadership coach is, no one, very few people that I know of can be those 12 things. The list goes on. You need to
Yes.
be a performance marketer. You need to be an audience insights and a market expert and a marketing strategist. You need to be a data scientist. You need to be a technologist. It's like
Yeah,
after
on
a
and
while,
on and on. Right.
yeah, it's like,
Right. Right.
how many polymaths, polyglots, whatever you call them, are out there in the world that can master all these things? None, really. It's nearly impossible. So that puts pressure, and elevates the importance for the marketing leader to have higher levels of organizational savvy, emotional intelligence, situational awareness, agility, and that's where I focus. Right? I mean, I think it's being self aware that there's so many blind spots for marketers now in a lot of organizations, and the stakes are so high that it's the softer skills that I believe are the things going to get them from you know director of marketing, VP, CMO, maybe even president. And you probably seen the data.
Hmm.
I think it's Deloitte every year does a CMO tenure or a study, or whoever does it, Spencer Stewart, one of the big companies. The average tenure for the chief marketing officer is about 39 months. The shortest tenure in the C-suite, you go to the CFO, it's like 6 years. It's the CEO, it's about 8 years. So
Right.
the CMO is kind of in this really kind of challenging role, and a lot of I know Google did some really good research about 3 or 4 years ago. They talked to a lot of CEOs and a lot of board members,
Hmm.
and about marketers, the CMO. And the fact is that a lot of CEOs and board directors just don't know what CMOs do. They don't know what marketers do, and they don't
Right.
know
Right.
why the budgets are so big, and they don't see the payback. So I think there's a lot of work to be done, internally to sell the story better.
Yeah, and I think that's a great point because even with our clients, sometimes the owners, so to speak, will have conversations with me and say, well, I have somebody who handles marketing, but I don't know what they do all day. Until you take the time to
Yeah.
educate them, because a lot of those individuals, at least from my experience, I think they understood it conceptually potentially better pre-digital. Not that there were,
Hmm.
because I think digital made a mistake promising attribution to everybody. You can measure
Hmm.
everything, know where everything was, where before, if you had your billboards out there, if people mentioned them, or if people mentioned to you that, hey, I saw your commercial, or if you saw your
Right.
commercial, you were going, well, that seemed to work, and you had a steady flow. Where now, to your point, the marketer has to be this Swiss Army knife, because they have to understand
Exactly.
analytics, understand how to work with the data scientists to create the audiences. Now I have to get the audiences. Now I have to work with the technology or the ad platforms to push this out and then measure it. And not everything can be measured, to your point,
Hmm.
this idea of this downstream flow where everything has to be connected in an idea where I can see
That's
that
right.
same message on every platform. But the problem is everybody looks at every type of advertising through one lens, instead of video views might be the metric for this, and conversions might be a metric for this. And,
Hmm.
and so to your point is, I think there has to be a lot more education cross departments to understand what they are doing and how they connect. I think that's really important. So how, if a marketer would come to you, or one of your clients you're working with says, how do I explain it? So again, my CEO, my president, the person across the desk says, I don't know what you do. How do they help educate? What would be something they could do to help educate others about what they do?
I think there's two pieces to that. It's a really good question. It's not an easy answer. I think there's the informational piece. There's
Mm-hmm.
the left brain piece, which is you need to kind of unpack it for them and explain it. And I think there is the more relational piece, right? I think it's more about influence. I think it's more about that's why I talked about organizational savvy, situational awareness.
Mm-hmm.
I think that CMO or whomever really needs to spend a lot of their time and energy on building trust and strong relationships, kind of with their peers,
Right.
technology, sales, chief financial officer, the list goes on, um, supply chain operations, but also up with the CFO and the CEO and the president,
Mm-hmm.
because it's just got my observation is that being a great marketing leader has become, or just doing marketing in this current environment has become so multifaceted, it's so complex
Right.
that it's a little bit of a black box for, like you said, some of your clients say, I don't know what they do all day. I think I hate to say it, but a big part of the CMO's job is kind of educating their peers and their superiors about what they're doing, what it takes to be successful. And if you want to have a connected experience, if you want to have a connected enterprise, if you
Right.
want to have sales and marketing integrated, if you want to have great ROI, or at least attribution models, there's a lot of things, a lot of stars that have to be aligned, and so that CMO needs to play that orchestrator, that role, and
Right.
that's a relational thing, right? That's a influence thing. That's not, you need to know the subject matter of marketing, but it's like the old, what's the guy's name? Marshall Goldsmith, right? I don't know if you know Marshall, right? One of the original executive leadership coaches. Um, the book he put out maybe 15, 20 years ago was one of his big books, was called, what got you what got you here won't get you there. What
Yes.
got you here won't get you there. The point is, what made you a phenomenal marketer, right? Great, creativity, great
Mm-hmm.
analytics, or amazing insights into consumer behavior, or whatever it is, um, isn't going to make you necessarily a great CMO, or a great,
Right.
organizational, a president, or
Yes.
CEO. It's a whole different, and so that's kind of where that the development piece comes. Because I've worked with so many, hundreds of great marketers from the creative side and the media side, on the strategy side, and they're such great they're so great at their craft. But when it
Right.
comes to kind of playing that kind of it's stepping into that kind of executive role where you have such a multidimensional leadership challenges, they weren't prepared for that. It's just
Well,
it's not their
it's
training.
a completely different skill set. It's sometimes it's easier to explain from a sales strategy because people understand sales, but what made you a great salesman doesn't make you necessarily a
Exactly.
great sales leader. Because to
Right.
your point is, I know how to take care of myself. I know how to market. I know how to create. I know how to leverage. But when now all of a sudden I'm dealing with personalities, even if it's not up, like you're saying, but if I'm running a
Yeah.
team of people, now all of a sudden I
Yeah.
have to deal with a whole different dynamics. Or how do I communicate with the sales team as the marketer to get information from them to say, what
Yeah.
are you seeing out there? What are the issues you're running across? What can I give you to help? And then that influences your marketing, where if you don't do that, sales and marketing have a, sometimes you've seen it. They have a little
Of
bit of an
course.
antagonistic relationship where,
Yeah.
hey, you didn't give me leads, that's why I can't sell, or the leads you gave me are bad, or marketing's going, I gave you them, you're horrible, you're not closing. So instead of collaborating, and then same thing, how do I collaborate with the data? How do I collaborate with leadership to
Yeah.
explain that this is a journey from this ad's going to take them to that ad, to take them to that ad, to take them that ad, to bring them down into a point where they
Hmm.
want to reach out to the sales, or when sales reach out, they go, oh, I know who you're talking about. So you're right. It's a completely different skill set. So for you then, why do you think, I mean, it tees up perfectly for what you do because there is a need, but why do you think they're missing
Right.
that? Well, why do you think organizations miss that responsibility to say, well, I promoted you. That means you're going to need different skill sets. Go figure it out on your own. Like, it always confuses me, which is why I started the podcast,
Yeah.
was to try and help. So,
Yeah.
why do you think there's such that big hole or gap?
I just don't. I don't think that a lot of executives or people in general, they don't think two, three, four steps down, right? And they may not look at a
Right.
situation holistically. Um, and look, I mean, there are many organizations that do invest in leadership development,
Mm-hmm.
and they do bring they do believe in coaching and things like that. Um, and that requires I think a bit of uh, open-mindedness and curiosity and
Mm-hmm.
desire to learn, right? I mean, I think that so some executives are much, and some organizations are much more growth-minded, if you will, in that way,
Right.
and some are more transactional-minded. I've worked for a lot of different. A lot of different companies, and it kind of it's a cultural thing. It may come down from the CEO, or it may just be a little bit more about the heritage of the company, that is more of a sink or swim mentality versus
Right.
a
Right.
development mentality. So I think I believe that the power of executive coaching and leadership development. I do believe more organizations are becoming aware of how it can. And it's not just about. It is about developing people. At the end of the day, though, it's like what is it doing for my organization and my business, right?
So,
So
so, so on that point, do you think one of the things, because it just made me think, do you think it's because it takes longer, or it's not as fast, or if it's, well, I hired Fred and he's been working with Glenn for a couple months and I don't see a change, or where's the impact to my bottom line, where it's more of a long term, as you said earlier, 3 or 4 steps down the road, and we're going to build those skills, and long term, Glenn's going to be in a better position versus
right,
very transactional of, well, I'm
right,
paying this and I don't see an ROI. Get out. This is why I don't do training.
yeah. I think it's I think the answer is that it's kind of hard work to
Yeah.
to design an executive coaching or a leadership development uh, intervention or program
Mm-hmm.
that is going to be customized to the situation and being designed to generate a result, right? And so what we do is whenever we have a new client, we do a kind of a consult call. We understand the situation, and then we prepare a custom coaching plan, right? So it's not a generic coaching plan. It's
Right.
like, okay, this is what we heard. These are the areas where we want to focus, and we will then also work with whether it's the sponsoring organization or the client to say, okay, what are the endpoints here? What are the measurables that we need to focus on? What do we need to accomplish? Um, or what does the coachee, the client need to accomplish in 6, 9, 12 months to make this a success?
Right.
So, having those conversations up front makes everybody accountable to something as opposed to just an open-ended coaching hey,
Right.
what do you want to talk about today? Right? I mean, that's not necessarily a productive path forward for coaching and development. And a lot of times you see results because it's focused on a specific attitude. It's focused on a specific behavior. It may be about a lack of self-awareness in a certain aspect of that executive's work
Right.
style. So one of the things I like to do is think about a couple of dimensions, right? So it's like the first thing we focus on many times is leading the self, right? Is the executive um, you know, coming to work in the best version of themselves, right? Are they aware of their strengths and weaknesses? Are they aware of how they're interacting with people and how those interactions are impacting their work performance and their team's performance? So that
Right.
leading self is all about how they manage themselves internally and how they manifest externally. Then the next thing is leading the team. How are
Right.
you leading? Are you engaging and cultivating good relationships with your team? Are they motivated? Are they satisfied? Are they engaged? Are they getting the results? It's not all about results, but good team member engagement or employee engagement and satisfaction. Typically, the research is pretty powerful, saying it's going to lead to better work product, better results.
Right.
Then the next thing is about um, organizational leadership. If you're a senior person, there's things that we look at. I love the leadership challenge, and I'm familiar with that Kouzes and Posner, all the research they've done about the 5 practices of exemplary leadership, starting with modeling the way, being kind of a paradigm of behavior,
Right.
establishing a really compelling vision, but a shared vision, not your vision. It has to be shared. Enabling and empowering people, things like that. So those are the 3 kind of dimensions that we could look at. But it's not generic. It's every
No, everybody
organization.
comes to you at a
Yeah,
different phase. And what I really
yeah,
like about that is you're not putting everybody through one standard process. You're basically having your toolkit or all of your tools at your disposal to say, where are you at? Because when you audit that, you're right. Maybe I have a great sense of myself, check. But when I interact with my team, there's the hole. Or
yeah,
recognizing how to get the organization or creating structure so my team can repeat behaviors to generate consistent results. And so I like that idea. And so there's 2 things I saw on your website that I
yep,
really thought were good. You mentioned this idea of culture of connection, and then also
yes.
the adapt framework. And I don't know if that was sort of tied in. So let's
Oh
talk about
yeah,
this idea of culture of connection, because I get it, but from your standpoint, when somebody when you present that to someone and say, well, you need a culture of connection, and they go, well, what does that mean? What
right.
explain that to me.
Yeah. So the culture of connection. Um, there, there's a couple of some research that I think I leaned on um, from about a year or two ago. The first is that, Gallup every year, or at least a couple of times a year, they do a global employee engagement study.
Right.
And they've been doing it for about 15 years. And in the last 4 years, a lot of it was pandemic driven.
Hmm.
Um, but the level of employee engagement and employee satisfaction at work have declined a bit. So it was probably, if it was, the line was like this, it's kind of
Right.
dipped down, and the levels have never been high. You ask some people how engaged are you at work, and the typical answer, I think, historic average is maybe like 27%. I think that dropped to like 19% or something like that. And so that means that 4 out of 5 people are not engaged at work. That's a big number. Um, so,
So when they
and
say
then the
engaged
satisfaction.
at work, that means they don't like their job, or are they just not busy enough? Or what? So again, some people are going to say, wait a minute, 4 out of 5 people are not engaged at work. That means they're just there, marking time. Even for me, I'm like, I'd take
Yeah.
half, maybe three, to maybe 1 out of 4, but to say 3 out of 4 people are not engaged at work, it means that, what are your thoughts? Do you buy that?
Well, I think you got to look at. I haven't looked at how that's conceptualized, but
Right.
I think engagement is a measure of. Um, I'm sure it's a there's 4 or 5 variables that make that up, but it's things
Right.
like, do you feel like you're using your working to your full potential?
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Do you
Yep.
feel like you have a good relationship with your boss, your colleagues? Do you feel that you are doing work that it gives you meaning, a sense of meaning?
Yeah.
It's those kinds of questions.
Okay, so then
So I
that
don't.
clarifies. I got that. That makes
Yeah,
sense, because
yeah,
then it's, if I have a good relationship with my boss, but we're not doing anything that's, saving the world, so to speak, but I have a job and I'm taking care of my family. Okay, then I can see how someone might look at that and go, I'm engaged, meaning I'm working, but I don't get up every day and like run down the street because I'm so excited. So I get that. Okay,
yeah, yeah.
that
And I
clarifies it.
think but I think that the other number, there's a couple of numbers. There's engagement and then satisfaction. The satisfaction number is even lower. So again, I think 4 out of 5 people are don't not feeling engaged, not really satisfied with work, and historically those numbers have been higher. And I think the pandemic was a big driver of that.
Yep.
So I guess people are not feeling connected. They're not feeling like they are part of something that they believe in, and something that um, motivates them. That was one piece of research. The other piece of research was, Edelman, a big PR communications company. They do these trust monitor research every year, and the level of um, polarization in society and culture and workplace is never been greater. It's really
Yes.
bad.
Yes.
And the and there were two questions that they added to the barometer that were really, I think, like, would you work with somebody who didn't have the same political views as you? Like 80% said absolutely not. Or, or would you help somebody in the workplace if they had a different philosophical or political position? No, I wouldn't. Like, they may be throwaway questions, but so the point is that people need to, I believe, in order to do their best work, they need to feel like they're part of a community. They're part
Right.
of a team. And there's we're social beings. People are we're we kind of live and exist for connection. And so leaders that want to have healthy organizations, healthy teams,
Hmm.
and so we need to kind of work on creating that culture of connection,
Right.
right? And creating a feeling that the people are part of something. And so that was the point of that piece was. And there was some research. Oh yeah, there was some really interesting research that was behind that. Um, that connected that to work product. So I know Stanford, but a team of researchers at Stanford did a series of studies going back maybe 5 or 6 years ago.
Hmm.
And it was all, maybe they got, say, 12 people, and they said, we're working on this very complex project. There's 12 of you. You all need to kind of work together on it. And these are the elements. You're going to work on this piece. You're going to work on that piece, and
Right.
we're going to report back in a week. When they measured the team effort, and then they did a separate study, which is you're working on this by yourself.
Right.
You have
Right.
6 weeks to do it. When they looked at the level of engagement, the level of commitment, the hours worked, the complexity of the solutions, the depth of the work product they produced, the people that were part of a team significantly outperformed those who were working individually.
Oh,
So they all
without a doubt.
felt they were kind of collaborative, right? So that idea of collaborating, being connected, being part of a community has a really powerful impact on people's motivation and how they
Oh,
show up at work.
absolutely. And I think that, what we've been talking about is I think that is one of the pieces for leaders, and be it the marketer, be whoever, is selling that idea of that mission and where we're going as a team and what we're going to accomplish. And everybody's role is important. And then that herd mentality sort of takes over, where you don't
Yeah,
want to be the
absolutely.
one dragging someone back. You don't want to disappoint the team. You're 1 + 1 = 4, because now I start asking you your opinion, and maybe you're seeing something different than I do, where if it's just me solo, I only have myself to rely on. I'm going to get my work done, but I can only take it as far as I can take it, versus having that connection, going back to that word, that connection with the team. We can bring the project, and even my piece can be brought further, because I'm getting feedback from others that maybe I missed, or I didn't even think of. And I think, to your point, is that is truly one of the main things. And going back to your first point about the marketer having to create that connection across departments, everybody
Yeah,
in
absolutely.
that leadership role. So even the salesperson has to connect to the other departments, and everybody has to connect. And if that is a cultural thing where we're all banding together and we all understand, I don't need to understand fully what you're doing, but I have to understand what you're doing. So then I can either lend a hand, understand, see what you need. And then we as a team can push our whole initiative further because of that. So talk to me about this ADAPT framework, because again, your website, for those of you listening, we'll put it into the show notes.
Yeah,
Your
absolutely.
website has a lot of really good resources for someone to understand how you can help organizations. But even if somebody wanted to read that, there's a lot of great information. So this ADAPT framework, briefly, what is
Yeah.
that?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I just going like following up on that conversation about the culture of connection. The thing that the leader needs to do is not be this amazing subject matter expert. They need to be um, people who are able to activate others and inspire
Mm,
others to do
right,
amazing things,
right,
right? And so the adapt solution framework, it's kind of a tool that I created to um, a simple way to ask yourself as an executive when you're in making a decision or you're leading a team. Are you embodying some of the principles that we talked about? Self leadership, leading self, leading team, leading the organization,
right,
emotional intelligence, things like that. So ADAPT is an acronym, right? So the A is about assessing, right? So it's assessing the situation objectively without bias and bringing the
right.
right mindset to it, right? So in my when I talk about one of my programs is around agile leadership, right? And agile leadership is all about bringing certain mindset and bringing certain work behaviors forward. And one of the big things about an agile mind is a growth mindset versus a fixed mindset.
Mhm.
And for a marketer, it's a big thing, right? Because many times marketers work in highly competitive spaces, or
Mhm.
um, and if you have a fixed mindset, and you are not looking at adjacent opportunities or emerging opportunities or bringing a fertile mind to complex problems, you're probably not gonna be an innovator. You're
Right.
probably not gonna
Right.
drive growth.
Right.
So the growth mindset that assessing the situation objectively without bias, but with a growth mindset. So it's about bringing the right mindset forward.
Right.
Um, so that is the first thing, right? You're kind of helping to frame the
The
situation, frame the
situation.
opportunity.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The second one is develop, right? And so after you've assessed, um, this leans on that leadership challenge. One of the key leadership practices they talk about is then develop an inspired vision, right? To how are you going to address this challenge or this opportunity? And you need to do it in a way that is inspiring, but also consistent with your organization, consistent with the
Yes.
values of the organization.
Yes.
And the mission and the purpose and the strategy and all those things. But again, it's all about being an inspiring leader. Um,
Right.
the next is A, approach. This is the adapt framework, right? So approach is all about agility. And so again, if you could have the greatest insight about a marketplace challenge or opportunity, you're going to have a brilliant vision, inspiring vision. But if you don't kind of go after it in a way that is, agile, quick,
Right.
responsive, smart, you could have a great strategy without execution is kind of
Yes. It's
not a
a
very
great plan. It's great on
successful
paper. Yeah.
scenario.
Right.
Um,
Exactly.
and then the P is prepare, right? And it's all about mobilizing. So we talked earlier about marketers, right? And marketers kind of, I want to say they're the hub and spoke, but many times they are at the
Mhm.
middle of the relationship between the technology team, the sales team.
Yes.
The CFO has a stake in kind of investing in this and the broader organization. So they need to mobilize the people around them, right? They need to mobilize their key influencers, the stakeholders that are important contributors, decision makers. They need to have influence, and so that's that softer kind of relational piece that I think is
Yes.
so important. And then finally, T is all about transforming, right? So transformation is again, it's about not doing things the way they've always been done. This goes back also to the leadership challenge is that, great leaders challenge the process. They bring new ways of working, new ways of thinking, of an experimentation mindset. They drive innovation, and innovation is sometimes not. It's not always about a new strategy. It's about how you get things done. It's about how you organize a team. It's about how you design a project plan. So
Right.
that adapt is. I think I came up with this as a way of saying, hey, if I want to be a really forward thinking, innovative, creative leader, the adapt solution framework is something that you can keep in mind as a way to keep you focused
Yeah, I really like
embodying
it.
that.
Yeah, and when I saw it, thought this is really crystal clear because both for both sides, and that's what I liked about it. The receiver of all of this information, they go, "Oh, here's all the steps. They make sense because I have to assess it. I have to, devise what my plan is going to be. I have to really activate them I got to get all the pieces together, and then off we go, and then we transform."
Yeah,
As well as it keeps me centered as the leader, as my anchor or my map. But more importantly, it's an easy way to explain to the team where we're going and all the
yeah.
steps that are part of it. I really like that. And I thought that was really, really
Oh, thank you.
useful. I
Yeah,
really thought that was great. So as we wrap up, I got one other thing. And at the end of the show, we always ask a few different questions, but around
sure.
change, because this is what your work is helping people
Hmm.
change.
Hmm.
If somebody says to you change, now we always know sometimes change is hard, and we know that a lot of
Yes.
times it sometimes takes I don't want to say pain, but there's sometimes an event that says like, okay, that playing around with this is we've all the options are off the table now. We have to do this, or
Hmm.
something dramatic is. But what is it about organizations in terms of
Hmm.
change? Is it
Hmm.
that because, like you were saying, the marketer's the hub and the spoke, it's easy to wait on other people or push it down? Oh, yeah, why? Or does it just take that leader at the top to say, this is the initiative, and like we said, there's pain and we're changing or whatever. Everybody, it's a broad question, but in your
Yeah, it's a good
experience,
question.
like what is the biggest hurdle that people get from that idea of
Yeah,
that planning stage to execution stage?
yeah, I think it's a really interesting. It's a big question. It's a good question. I think that the behavioral scientists talk a lot about status quo bias, right? And
Mhm.
I think that people and organizations tend to like the status quo, the way things are, because it's easy.
Right. Right.
And we all have. I have. I like to. Once I do something in my life, if I have to change it, sometimes I find it to be very irritating. It's just because it's automatic now, and I don't have to think about it.
Right. It's
So that
predictable. Yeah.
disruption,
Yep.
yeah, it requires mental effort. Um, and and I think that people and organizations, they kind of there's another behavioral principle called the endowment effect, and we kind of get attached to the way things are, because you know it's a comfort zone for us. So
Right.
disruption takes people out of their comfort zone, takes organizations out of their comfort zone, and that goes back to the adapt solution framework. I called it adapt because one of the key things that I like to work on is this idea of developing an adaptive mindset, right?
Right.
And that's the core of that. The key principle is kind of moving yourself from a reactive mindset where you're guided
Mhm.
by events outside of you, right? You're not what they call self-authoring
Right.
your
Yeah.
world,
You're
right?
responsive. You're
You're
responsive.
reacting,
Yes.
right? A creative mindset has a couple of maybe core principles or guiding, a north star, and an adaptive, a creative mindset. They don't just kind of jump at everything in front of them. They're guided by that mission, that purpose, that vision that they have. And so, I think when it comes to change, it just disrupts this kind of this we have people, humans like simplicity, right? All the research, the neuroscience research, is that says that you know we have two ways of thinking. We have a very automatic, um,
Mhm.
quick way of responding to things, and we like that because we simplify the world around us. Anything
Right.
that requires mental effort, we
Yes.
tend to shy away from because we're kind of lazy, and that could be good for a lot of simple things, but for big things,
Right.
when you take people out of that kind of automatic reactive mindset, it's jarring, it's exhausting, and it makes people feel uncomfortable. And I think that's why change is so hard for people and organizations.
Yeah, and I think there's just listening to that, two things popped into my head. One is why that adapt process can be helpful because you have a process. I think sometimes people change for change sake, or someone comes in and they want to change something. But to your point is we haven't slowed down to think about, well, why are we changing? Is this the right change? How does it change? Do we even need to
Hmm.
change? Because I've consulted with some of, outside of the agency people, some clients have asked me my opinion. They're like, well, I saw this at a trade show and this was awesome. Or another colleague's company
Yeah,
uses it. And I'm going, but you don't need that. Have you thought this through? Oh,
right.
and so I think sometimes change happens, but it's not thought through. And then to your point is that change is more disruptive in a negative way. And so then
Yeah,
people are
it's a great.
afraid of change overall because they're going, we're not going to go through that again. Versus to your point is a well thought out plan where
Yeah,
if I have that core, this is who we are, this is what it is, then you can look at each thing and say, well, what are we doing currently? And is this change better, worse, or whatever? And if it's better, then it's okay, who owns it? How do we put it in? What are the
yeah,
hurdles? What are the things? And I think that's where what I like about that adapt principle is it slows everyone down
yeah. Exactly.
to have
Yes.
these conversations versus, hey, because everybody's had it. where some supervisor comes in on a certain day and we're changing this, and you're, where the hell did that come from? And
Yeah,
how did you come
exactly.
up with that idea? But because of their title or whatever, here we go down this roller coaster, and they know probably in 60 days, it's going to go out or it's going to
Right.
change again. So why do I get invested in any change when it's going to change? If that makes sense.
Yeah,
It's a
yeah,
very
yeah.
funny thing.
It, something you said, that's one of the great things about a leadership coach, executive coach, is they kind of can act, first as a thought thinking partner. So if you're working with a coach, say, I'm thinking of implementing this change. It's like, okay, so unpack that for me. What's the purpose of the
Right.
change? What's the
Yep.
desired? And and um, and then the other thing is a great coach will reflect back on their client and say things like, okay, you told me you want to drive this change because you want to achieve this outcome. Does that make tell me how that makes sense to you, or like how is that the best way to get to that outcome? And so
Right.
you're not devil's advocate, but you're helping them unpack their thinking and think
Yeah.
more about
Yeah,
their
you're not
thinking.
poking, you're not necessarily being antagonistic to say it's not. You're slowing them
Exactly.
down to just say, walk me through your thought process so that we go, absolutely great, let's roll. Or, hey, last time you told me this, or oh God, I forgot about this. So you become that,
Yeah.
you're the gas and the brake when you need to, alternate of what they are. They're too hard on the brake. You're like, nah, you can hit the gas, or vice versa. Of like, hey, you're running really quick, but you forgot to go through the
Right.
process that you told me you've used to be successful, but now you're not following it. And you're like, oh yeah, I guess I am. So again, listen, I could chat with you for hours. I love, this has been
It's
a
great.
great
It's great. Thank you.
conversation. Thank you. So at the end of the show, I asked 3 questions. I call them the one because it's just one thing. So the first one always is, because you're obviously consuming a lot of information too, what's something you're reading, watching, listening to that's inspiring you to help you get better at what you do?
This is going to sound really interesting, probably a little counterintuitive, but I don't watch a lot of television, but I just watch Succession.
Yeah,
And I found, what's his name, the Brian Cox character.
right.
You know, if you think about leadership coaching and you talk about, the 5 practices of exemplary leadership, in watching that, and not just what's his name, Brian Cox, but the other character, everything they do, you look at, what makes great leaders is like, it was like, wow, you don't do that. You should have done this. Or a few things that some of them
Right.
did that I thought were good, but that was a really interesting. Whoever wrote that script, the British screenwriter, did a great job at kind of understanding what really great leaders do and what really bad leaders do. And
Right.
so it was just you watch that show and don't do that.
Yeah, it's one of the, well, that's always a great lesson, because there's as much, I've always, when I've coached people, I've always said to write down, one of the first exercises I do, I say, write down some of the things that you loved that your previous leaders or managers did, and then write down all the things that you hated. And then I'd say, okay, see that
Right.
half of the page that say all the things you hated, don't do that. Don't do that, because if it bothered you, it probably bothers someone else. Okay. Next
Yeah.
question is, what's the one thing you're working on personally for yourself that a year from now you're going to look back and say, I'm glad I invested time in that?
Yeah. Also in addition to doing executive leadership coaching, I'm also working on some fractional CMO type
Mm-hmm.
work in the biotech space. I've done a ton of work in biotech,
Right.
and that's really a area of passion for me. And so, um, it being a fractional CMO is not necessarily an easy thing. Number one, being a fractional CMO in a highly complicated, highly regulated area like biotech is another complexity. So I'm really
Right.
excited about it, and it'll take a while to get that off the ground, but it's something I'm working on that I'm excited
Good.
about.
Great. I love that one. Last question. I always ask this to everybody. We've talked about a
Yep.
lot of great information. And again, thank you. I hope everybody's listening, writing down, and then come back and listen again, because there's a lot of stuff that Fred shared. What's the one thing that you would hope that people got out of this conversation? If it's like, just, if you got one thing out of this, this is what I hoped you got, what would it be?
Yeah, I think it's something you said earlier. I mean, I think it's, if you're leading a team, you're leading an organization, I think it's being more self-aware, and that's a big statement, being self-aware. But I think it's being more thoughtful about what you're doing, how you're showing up, how you're behaving, and realizing that as a team leader, as an organizational leader, the things you do, the way you behave, the attitudes you engender, kind of cascade through that organization.
Right.
This goes back to the old Peter, and you create the culture. You kind of create the culture for that team or that organization. And I would just conclude on, the Peter Drucker, said something years ago that I thought was so amazing, which is that, culture eats strategy for lunch. If you don't have the right culture, and that's your responsibility, no matter how brilliant your strategy is,
it's just not,
our operations are, it's just not going to happen.
Absolutely. I totally agree. And that's a great way. So again, thank you so much. So how do people connect with you? And folks, you should connect. One, the website is a great resource, but I've been following, looking at things, listening to your other podcasts. You're a great resource. So how, if somebody wants to connect with you, where should they go and where do they connect?
Yeah, attainleadership.com is the website. My email is fred@attainleadership. And I'm on, of course, on LinkedIn, Fred Petito. And yeah, I'd love to hear from you.
Great. And I'll put all of those in the show notes as well. So again,
excellent.
Great. And I appreciate everything. So folks, you know what to do. Just hang on for just a minute or two as we read out. But again, I thank you so much. There's a lot of places for you to listen to content, but the fact that you spent time with Fred and myself today means the world. So again, hang tight as we read you out, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode. Again, thanks so much, Fred.
Thank you, Glenn. Thanks for having me.